of course, one of the number one questions on every Christian podcast. So, Riley, how did you become a disciple? Tell me how you came to the Lord.
Yeah, no, I love this question because my story sort of doesn't fit necessarily the typical mold of somebody my age in our church movement. I feel like a lot of times when I ask people their stories, they were either met at campus, like they had not grown up in the church, got converted at a college or university, or maybe grew up in the church and, got baptized as a teen or maybe in campus. But for me, I grew up in the Churches of Christ, what we call the mainline or traditional Churches of Christ, down in Southern California, North County Church of Christ. And I really appreciated the upbringing that I had there. It was very
Yeah.
Bible focused, and in respects to doctrine, really similar, if not identical, to our church movement and what I've experienced here in the Seattle church. I think for me, the pieces that were lacking for me personally, as I understood farther along, was I wasn't really open about my sin, and I didn't necessarily go out of my way to reach out to my friends. I think it was really easy to give 99% of my life to God, just in the sense that
Sure.
I grew up kind of as a generally good kid, quote unquote, very well mannered and behaved. People would probably look at me and think as like kind of the goody two shoes Christian. I really respected the Bible, really loved God, had a great picture of what it looked like to build a Christian community. I think what I just really lacked and needed, even as I came up to Seattle, and I moved there to go to school at Seattle Pacific University. And when I got plugged in with the group there, I felt like it was one of the first times that I saw a whole group of young people really passionate about the Bible. They really knew the Bible and really wanted to put it into practice. And no group is perfect, and there's other parts to that story that have had its ups and downs and everything. But I feel like I had gone through a season through high school of really struggling in certain areas in my life. I dated a couple girls who kind of were kind of Christian, you know what I mean? And I was like, I want to take this seriously, like 100%. I don't want to just be 98, 99% Christian. I want to do this for real. And it wasn't long after that I had moved up to Seattle, got plugged in with the group, and just was like, wow, okay, like teach me these things. They showed me how to be open with my sin. They took me around to show me how to evangelize, and I just really deeply wanted that training. And so obviously, as someone who went through all those different challenges and then coming into a new church group, when I went to church the first time, they said, "Oh, welcome to the Seattle Church of Christ." And so in my mind, I'm like, "Oh, it's Church of Christ."
Yeah.
Like, that's what I grew up in. And then for many of, I'm sure your listeners, we know there's some historic differences where the Church of Christ and International Church of Christ have gone their own ways.
Right.
But anyway, I started studying the Bible with a couple of the guys, and that had its ups and downs too. I think they didn't really know what to do with me because I was one of those guys who was answering all the questions right. And I think giving off a really genuine, faithful spirit, because I think that's really where I was at the time. Like, I was like, I want to be a disciple. I want to take this seriously. But just some of my pieces in my story didn't line up. And so they just I think at first were really like, oh, let's make you a member. And then they're like, wait, I don't know. And, there are pieces to where I think I wasn't necessarily always approached the best in that regard, because I think there was just some immaturities and people just didn't know what to do with the nuance of my story. Right. But long story short, I had gotten to a place at the end of my first year at SPU where I was going back home for the summer, and I was told I would not be added as a member, which is really hard, because I knew my own heart. I was trying to authentically wrestle myself. I was
Mm.
talking to people back home in my
Yeah.
home church, and then to getting a lot of advice from people in the Seattle church as well. And it's funny because there's actually some older members from back when it was just Church of Christ that knew each other of these two
Right.
churches, and so they were involved talking about this and like, what do we do with Riley? How do we help this guy? So anyway, I went away from for the summer, processing everything that had happened, especially that last quarter. It was really difficult. It was challenging. There were different hurts involved, but like I just knew like this is the place I wanted to be. I could tell that God was calling me to stay in that group, not for the sake of the people, but just because they had already shown me so much of the way of how to live like Jesus in a really authentic, full way that I just, even if I wasn't going to be a quote unquote
Yeah.
member, I was going to keep going. Which I think is
Mm.
actually something I would really like to convey to anybody who might be listening is like, sometimes we might encounter relational challenges with people, and it,
Right.
might discourage us from continuing in a community that otherwise would be really good for us spiritually, but we get hurt and we're like, okay, I'm out, right? But I'd really encourage anybody to persevere through that, because what I came to an understanding through this process was like God was going to fight for me. God was going to make it right one way or another. But I just knew that was a place that was spiritually edifying for me and had good doctrine and had good practice. But
Mm.
had broken humans, so it just
Oh,
wasn't
yeah.
perfect. But anyway, so I came back after the summer, and I got lunch with Ron Brumley, and because he was one of the guys who knew this man James Gibbs from my home church. They were longtime friends. James Gibbs was actually his like mentor and had sent him out to plant the Poway Church like years ago. The Poway Church of Christ in the mainline churches. But anyway, so Ron and I got lunch, and he, I think, saw the sincerity of my faith, that I was really trying. And so he went back to Seattle leadership and said, listen, just give this guy a shot. Like one way or another, it'll work itself out. Like it'll show from his life that he's not serious about this, and it will just fade out with time, and address the sin if, that arises accordingly as you need to. Or he'll live like a disciple and it'll all be fine, and he'll, just plug in and we just never think about it ever again. Or he'll come to a realization of, hey, I should get baptized. Like, so any of those three options, I think he just had a perspective of, let's just be humble to the fact that God is in control. We don't have to be the gatekeepers when like there's so much nuance we just don't know. So they were really humble to his input. And a week after coming back to Seattle after that summer break, one of the guys who had been studying with me got with me and basically was like, hey, we'd love for you to be a member. So I really appreciated Ron trusting God first and foremost, not even just trusting me. I think he did see something in me and appreciated, I think, what was some sincerity and humility in my faith. But ultimately that he was like, God's in control. God will sort it out. So funny thing is, fast forward, and I know this is a long story, but fast forward 6 years, I was already a member of the church. I got married to Elise. I was a worship leader, like, Bible talk leader, like all this kind of stuff. I'm deeply involved in this church.
Yeah.
And through that 6 years, I had a pervasive doubt every maybe 6 months to a year of like, is my conversion like legit? And one of the reasons why I really gave that the time of day, like I actually listened to it, is because I'm not necessarily someone who really second guesses himself by nature. Everyone has their insecurities, but that kind of pervasive doubt is not something I like struggle with in general. So I was like, okay, this is either a severe attack from Satan or God trying to get my attention. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between the two, but regardless, I went through different periods of talking to people about it and wrestling with it. And I feel like most times that I felt that kind of pressure on my spirit was when I would study the Bible with people and just feel like, man, like I'm saying this one thing, but I know there's a couple pieces here that like don't fully line up, or I don't it just isn't showing that I have a good conscience about it. Like I don't feel good about it.
Yeah.
Um, and so at a certain point, I eventually talked to Marcus Wallace. God bless him. He said, "Hey, you really just need to make a decision about this, and I encourage you to read Repentance by Ed Anton."
Come on,
And
Marcus.
so I actually really recommend that book. It's one of my, most helpful books, at least in my personal journey. And what it helped me understand was the thing I said before of like, I really gave like 98, 99, maybe even percent of my life to God. But that stuff was easy. Like I withheld certain pieces, and to where we all know that repentance bears fruit in terms of even our actions, right?
Right.
It changes our behavior in such a way to where God is Lord of everything. Jesus is Lord of my entire life, and I don't withhold any piece, So I, through these different conversations and wrestling and much prayer, I decided to get baptized again. And it's funny because like I said, I was deeply involved in the church. Elise and I were even exploring at that time going into ministry. And I think it would have
Wow.
been maybe possibly confusing to people like about my story or whatever. So we kind of just gathered. So, well, obviously with the church leadership knowing and having this kind of having had talks with them too, they encouraged us to have like just a small group of our close friends who had been involved in the process go and have me get baptized. And one of the things that I that helped me come to that decision to get baptized was I was like, listen, I at the end of the day don't know 100% if the first one didn't take, quote unquote. But I thought about best case, worst case scenario. I was thinking, best case scenario, I'm getting right with God. Like I need to do this, and I'm not a saved believer. I need to get baptized. The worst case scenario is I'm just renewing my vows to God. So it's like there's really no downside. And so that helped me. That helped me say, okay, I just want to be able to put this past, like behind me, right? And I want to be able to move beyond it to where I don't have this pervasive doubt that continually detracts from my ability to reach the lost. Or just having kind of this oppressed spirit all the time. Like there's a lot of reasons why we don't need that. So anyway, I got baptized. That was in August of 2017. It was just like 6 months before we ended up going into ministry. And again, just being married to Elise and everything. It's just like, it was kind of a funny, interesting scenario where it's like, okay, were you married to like a non-disciple for like a year and a half or whatever? Kind of joked about that a little bit, but I think it just teaches us that it's not necessarily a super linear path in that it needs to have this cookie cutter look to it. Like the elements of a conversion are important and need to be present in everyone's story, right? Mm-hmm. But the thing is, if I would have made that decision to join the group at first, I think I would have done it for the wrong reasons. I think I would have done it just to join the group, for the friends, if I'm being honest, for the spiritual girls, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's where my head would have been at. But I made a faithful decision at that point where I was like, I want it to be about God, and God will make it clear. And at that point, I had decided in faith to rest on His grace. Because I just didn't understand certain parts that God revealed later. So to where once I had made that decision, it was about me and Him. And I've never doubted since, right? Like, it's just not a thought in my mind. That whole pervasive doubt thing went away entirely. So I'm really thankful that I got to experience a story like that. I think it's been really encouraging to other people of being like, wow, like God is good and He's so much bigger than our processes and how we go about things.
Well, Riley, you convinced me. My rebaptism will be this Sunday at 1 p.m. And
oh man, let's go.
No, an excellent example, because you were on staff, a disciple for 6 years, right? So you were first baptized as a teen, right?
I was baptized in preteens, actually, which is pretty common, I think, in a lot of churches of Christ. So I was almost 11, so I was young. I was 10, And I think there was a sincere faith, but just, a lacking understanding of myself and my sin. So
Yeah.
God showed me later.
Yeah, well, that's such an important example because it makes me think of First Timothy 4:16, life and doctrine, your testimony with first you're attracted to the church because of the doctrine. All the disciples are biblical and they have a love for each other. But then joining the International Church of Christ, it sounds like it was more of the life, and you wanted to be more of a practitioner, and you valued the training and evangelizing. And I certainly relate to that a lot. And I appreciate that elder who also said, Riley is good. He's going to show it with his life. But then you turn around and you're studying the Bible with others, and that hits your conscience on the doctrine side again. And God worked it out. Trusting the Lord, you mentioned. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. God fights for us. We just don't need to spend too much time fighting for ourselves.
Hey family, thank you for watching this teaser video. If you'd like to listen to the entire interview, check out the podcast link in the description down below. Thank you.